We all think we know it. The fluid that governs our planet, water. Omnipresent, with characteristics that appear familiar to us. If we look closer, however, it is full of mysteries. For instance, does water have a memory? Do the molecules remember events they were once confronted with? Are cosmic forces at work? The quest for the true characteristics of water leads straight to science's front line, where fact and mystery mingle. There, where but a few steps separate misconceptions from discoveries that change the world. Everything flows, everything is composed of water. The human body, plants, animals, the larger part of the earth is covered with water. No wonder then that metaphysics and science have always been interested in it. At some point in time, water was able to leave the mystical world behind and find its way into the scientific textbooks, with which everything seemed settled. Until suddenly, people turned up who recognized new and spectacular properties in water. Above all, its so-called memory, about which hundreds of stories are now told. The idea behind it is that water is influenced by its surroundings, by other materials that it comes close to, and also from rays and vibrations that are capable of changing certain characteristics of the water, and this in a very strange and mysterious way that to this day remains a mystery to science. The most astonishing assertion comes from a Japanese naturopath named Masaru Emoto. The proof he furnishes for the memory of water is as weird as it is thrilling. He claims to have proved without a doubt that water is capable of storing information which he can also make visible with the help of photographs. The form of water's ice crystals changes according to the nature of the information with which the water is confronted. Bad conditions and disharmony, says Emoto, can lead only to ugly crystals, such as those from Tokyo tap water or the murky depths of the Ganges River. Canadian glacial water, or pure water from the Alps on the other hand, produce edifying and harmonic forms of great beauty. Masaru Emoto also plied water with music, initially solely classical, from Beethoven to Chopin. He claims that water can remember the music and that its ice crystals reflect the character of the music. As one may well expect, Emoto found that Beethoven, Chopin and Bach prompted water to produce beautiful, evenly formed crystals, whereas modern music, most particularly heavy metal, brought forth nothing but amorphous, ugly shapes. Since one knows so little about water, many different theories exist. We are still at the very beginning and are presenting all this to scientists around the world to discuss. they may be distressed, since this is a completely new way of thinking. And once they've thought about it, they might still not know what to think, and if not, simply keep quiet. 12 years of research in the ice house, tens of thousands of crystal photos, the burden of proof seems immense. Water, Emoto states, is capable of remembering events, a claim that's enough to make any physicist's hair stand on end. For water has already presented us with a wealth of miracles, within the framework of the laws of physics too. Most substances stretch when they grow warm, and when they get colder they shrink. Not so with water, which is at its densest or heaviest at 4 degrees plus and not at 0 degrees centigrade. Thus, in winter, the coldest water is on the surface, and for this reason a lake will freeze downwards and not the other way around. When water freezes and becomes ice, it also becomes, as opposed to all other fluids, less dense. It expands and floats to the surface. Were this not the case, our world would look entirely different. There would be no floating icebergs, and ice cubes would sink to the bottom of our drinks. The cause of all the magical suppositions lies in the molecules. Although water is composed of 2 gases, oxygen and hydrogen, it does not, as is the case in many similar combinations, remain gas, but becomes a fluid. The explanation is that single water molecules join other water molecules, and together they form larger, short-lived structures, and thus become fluent. This phenomenon is generally considered a classic textbook example, although no one has ever actually seen the heaps of molecules. These appear to form and then dissolve again unbelievably quickly, and seem also to invest the water with a kind of temporary order, the so-called memory that can store information. Water that stores information. A hypothesis with which one particularly and very seriously concerns oneself in Russia. Hidden away for decades behind the Iron Curtain of the Soviet Union, researchers were protected from the shifting fashions of science, and this had the advantage of allowing them to approach a host of subjects without inhibitions. Yuri Rachmanin is considered the top authority on water research in Russia. He is vice president of the Academy for Natural Sciences. For him, the prime obligation of a researcher is always keep your eyes and your ears wide open.
Несомненно, к нам обращаются очень многие.
Many people come to us who work with water and search for unusual qualities in it. Often their ideas are quite absurd, and so we refuse to entertain them. But some of their findings are corroborated by chemical and physical tests, however. And that means that we researchers must examine them, since for us, investigation is the first commandment. And a lot does get done in Russia. By Witold Bakia, for example, who is primarily a researcher and, as a consequence, also a businessman. He owes his success to an invention which, according to the present state of science, shouldn't really exist at all. It took him 30 years to develop a machine to wholesale cereal production that will free water from bacteria and impure emissions in a matter of seconds without chemical additives. On the other, with remarkable qualities. It is biologically pure, heavy metals have been rendered harmless, and the dubious structure of the water radically altered in the process. Basically, the procedure relies on the familiar electrochemical technique of splitting the water, whereby a mixture of hydrogen and oxygen, the volatile oxyhydrogen, is produced. What remains a mystery is just how Witold back here managed to produce this particular reaction in his machine. But when all's said and done, one thing alone is important. It works.
Within last 5 years, we produced approximately 25,000 sterile devices for Russian hospitals. In any hospitals in Russia, you can find our sterile devices, our water purification systems, for getting washing disinfection and sterilizing solutions, ecologically pure washing disinfection and sterilizing solutions. It can save a lot of chemical reagents, can save money, can save efforts, etc.
The technical details remain a secret. At all events, the machine contains pipes made of titanium and ceramic membranes, through which the water is conducted and in some way activated. What happens to normal Moscow tap water in a matter of seconds is illustrated here by a test involving a few drops of ink. On the left, plain tap water. On the right, Bakir's altered activated water. While, as might be expected, the ink colors the tap water, the activated water swallows it up completely. Much of what happens here beggars scientific explanation.
No, there are no people who says that this is, cannot work because we cannot understand what is it exactly. There are no, because we have effect, we have, for example, we use these solutions for health. And we have a lot of studies and scientific reports which gives us answer that this solution is non-toxic and it's work. But why? This is question for anybody, for big scientists.
People who look on water simply as a solvent are mightily deluded. Water that falls from heaven as rain and washes the streets but does nothing else, that is simply not enough. Water is without doubt a source of energy and information. It yields hydrogen and oxygen. Here in Russia, several research projects are currently testing the possibilities of using water as a source of energy. They're even talking of constructing a water motor. A Moscow research institute and a further experiment in causing water to do things that are not quite in keeping with the laws of physics. One is attempting to expose oil-polluted water to a beam of shortwave light and, with the help of the induced energy, separate the oil from the water in the proverbial twinkling of an eye. The method, as one will clearly see, is not quite ready for serial production. First the water, then add a couple of drops of old oil, then a plastic bottle so the oil doesn't splash on the ceiling. It does work, even if a little uncontrolled. Seen from a chemical point of view, water molecules are quite simple and insignificant. And it is precisely this that thrills the Russian scientists. The further one looks, the more extraordinary concepts come to light. Vasily Kashirsky is a scientist and head of the mysterious Center for Physiological Security at the Institute for Strategic Research in Moscow. For many years, he has developed disks with geometric patterns that are, so he says, capable of loading cosmic energy and influencing the structure of water And with it, its memory too. The pattern itself has a religious meaning. This not only leads to various energy transmissions, but also to a reassembling of the water's structure. It's safe to say that faults in the water, such as those that cause cancerous effects in the human body, for instance, are thus eradicated. Most physicists would be astounded by this. Nevertheless, it is possible to measure this phenomenon. An electric charge takes place in the water, and it comes from the cosmos, says Kashiski. So, are we dealing with physics, or magic, or alchemy? The concepts of magic or alchemy are quite relative. On closer consideration, alchemy is also chemistry. I think the closer we get to water, the more we will find out about ourselves too. Whatever there is to it, the Russians have taken up the scent and hope one day to be able to broaden the laws of physics. My views on water have changed radically, and I'm certain that everyone else will change theirs also in the very near future. In the course of our research, it has become clear that we were quite simply unable to solve many of the mysteries involved, particularly those relating to the physical aspect of water. Magic and science. One of the great achievements of the modern world was the ability to clearly separate these concepts one from the other. The Tribunal for Arbitrating Disputes is now based in London, in the editorial offices of the magazine Nature, the High Court of Natural Sciences. What Nature publishes is deemed recognized, and he who is quoted in Nature is earmarked for a brilliant career. He who is rejected, however, or exposed by Editor-in-Chief Philip Campbell and his jury, might just as well say goodbye to the title of scientist. The memory of water and cosmic energy are taboo in these hallowed rooms. Verdicts are reached soberly and without emotion.
Whether scientists are known or unknown is irrelevant, but when a claim is unusual or extraordinary, we would take a special effort to make sure that the referees give it very careful scrutiny. And sometimes the referees have said the only way we can judge this result is for us or somebody else also to do the experiment before you decide whether to publish it. And on occasion, that recently that did happen. The referees suggested to us that we should do that, and we offered to do that with the authors, and they refused, so we didn't publish the paper.
But even nature can be wrong. In the 60s, the discovery of polywater kept the world on tenterhooks. A Soviet physicist discovered that in tubes partly filled with water, another new fluid would accumulate in a matter of days. Nature duly published the news. This new water was denser and tougher than normal water and froze only at -30 degrees centigrade, on top of which it appeared to possess a kind of memory. A worldwide polywater hysteria broke out. A year later, the dream was at an end. The water miracle was due to nothing but pollution, which no one had noticed until then. Altogether, 400 researchers had been led up the garden path. Could anything like it ever happen again?
Very hard to say, because people have learnt from that and from other experiences to be very cautious. But it's not clear that what happened was bad in polywater. What happened was a scientist, as far as I'm aware, made a claim based in perfectly good faith, and other scientists found it extremely interesting and made genuine claims which, on the face of it, were indeed interesting. What did happen, I think, which was perhaps questionable, was that the community wasn't sufficiently critical. So those claims went on for too long. Some people could have looked more carefully at what was being claimed, doing particular experiments more quickly than they were done, and the story could have been disproved scientifically.
However regulated by stringent laws the structure of natural sciences may be, it is very often single persons who upset the apple cart, as in the case of a 72-year-old Tyrolean who left school at an early age, but who nevertheless is responsible for an invention that defies the laws of physics and all those who question it. The man's name is Johann Grander, and his invention is the so-called revitalized water. Here we see him being decorated by the Republic of Austria for his services to science, and prior to this, much the same honor was bestowed on him by the Russian Academy of Natural Sciences. The reason for all these honors is Grander's much disputed invention, an appliance for the production of revitalized water that he successfully exports all over the world. After many long and arid years, Grander is now gaining recognition. And should this not be a case of gigantic mass suggestion, it can only mean one thing, that it is not a swindle, and the jubilation is a perfectly legitimate accolade. What exactly do Johann Grander's water revitalizers do? They ensure, for instance, that the water in a swimming pool meets the standard hygienic requirements, even when only a part of the prescribed amount of chlorine has been dissolved in it. So, less chlorine and yet adequate antibacterial protection.
Wir haben hier die Hauptwasserleitung.
Here we have the mains. The old pipe comes down here and leads to the individual taps. We interrupted the circuit here and introduced the activating unit like a bypass. The water flows in here, passes through the unit, and then re-enters the old pipe again quite normally, just as it did before. Nothing has been added, nothing taken away. What actually happens inside this box is poppycock from a scientific point of view, and it's Grander's secret anyway.
Der Magnet holt die Energie und gibt's weiter an.
The magnet attracts the energy and passes it on to the water. I never studied, so I always watched things and was allowed to notice it.
Da habe ich halt immer wieder beobachtet und so habe ich draufkommen dürfen.
Grander water has many different effects. Take, for instance, the Knoll Bakery in Bremen that delivers wholemeal products to 150 health food shops. According to the customers, the rolls made with Grander water stay fresh longer and are a good deal tastier too. Nobody feels they've had the wool pulled over their eyes by a dubious invention here.
Am Anfang war ich skeptisch, weil man sieht
I had my doubts to begin with. You can't see anything, you can't hear anything, and you can't smell anything. So all right, we tried it out, and right away we noticed that something had changed in the water, an improvement in various ways. One thing that is calculable in production is the relation of water to flour. Ever since revitalized water has been flowing here, more of it is used in baking. In other words, the same amount of flour as usual, but more dough, and for this reason the bread dries out less quickly than it used to. An additional advantage for the bakery is that since it hooked up the Grander appliance to its taps, it needs approximately a third less washing up liquid, quite apart from smaller but no less welcome side effects.
Mir schmeckt der Kaffee besser.
The coffee tastes better to me, and that's an important point for us bakers because we work mainly at night. It's not so bitter. Revitalized water is also used in the production of synthetic fibers, in factory cooling systems. The cooling must be constant, otherwise the quality suffers. Up till now, chemicals were necessary to fight slime, mold, algae, and calcium. Ever since a water revitalizer has been installed in the system, however, The cooling water has been free of algae and bacteria, and one can dispense with chemicals altogether. I'll admit that I was skeptical at first, thought the whole thing was some new age gimmick, but it was soon obvious that the quality of the cooling water was improving constantly with the new system. As a technician, I'm at a loss to explain it. Our readings showed good quality, to be sure, but for the moment, we can't explain why the water quality has become so consistent. When it comes to money, few firms are prepared to joke, and the Casino Austria gambling halls are no exception. And yet the branch in Felden employs a water revitalizer in its air conditioning unit. The reason being that the employees complained of dry eyes and throat inflammations. Since the cooling system has been filtered through a revitalizer, one can dispense with chemicals and no one moans about bad air anymore. As expected, it pays off. We've saved money. Our calculations tell us that we'll have recouped the Granda outlay within 3 years. Since faith in the law generally has little chance when pitted against profit, one thing is certain. Mr. Granda's revitalized water appliances work, even if science is unable to explain why. It's a fact that shouldn't be considered reprehensible, for all the laws of physics are only models after all. As Albert Einstein once wrote, the most beautiful and deepest experience a man can have is the sense of the mysterious. It is the underlining principle of religion, as well as all serious endeavor in art and science. He who never had this experience seems to me, if not dead, then at least blind. Water is intelligent. It's enormous, much more than the air. No one has ever researched that because it's like I say. Those who have no money, or not much, they try something out. And those who have a lot of money, the scientists, they research something, and it's much the same.
You can only be a scientist if you act in a scientific manner. I think there are well-established ways of doing science. So even if you're questioning orthodox ideas, nevertheless you do have to do science in a way that other people can do, and that does stand up to tests of the standards of measurement. So, for example, if you make a measurement, you have to report the accuracy of that measurement. And a lot of reports that make outrageous claims that subsequently get discredited don't follow those rules. If you look carefully at the measurements, you find that they're making extraordinary claims for the accuracy of the measurements. So that's an indicator sometimes that there's something wrong.
This man would never tolerate being accused of working unscientifically, and yet Vladimir Konstantinovich Kondratov, a doyen of Russian physicists, is the only man yet to have offered a daring explanation for the peculiar effects of Granda's water. He assumes that water possesses structures that can be altered. These structures are able to absorb the sun's energy and cosmic rays as well. When water is treated by Granda's technology, the structures get larger. They grow. And these chair-like structures also enlarge vertically. And because they enlarge, they are also able to load more energy from the sun and the cosmos. You understand, the bigger the packages, the more energy can be drawn from the sun and the cosmos and distributed to the environment. And here again, the concept cosmos enters the discussion, apparently as a synonym for the inexplicable. Can it be that divine providence has guided Johann Grande in hitting the bullseye and shaking the very roots of physics? For despite his modest academic prowess, he does possess some of the most important characteristics of a good physicist. He was curious and playful his whole life long. The old man and his ideas represent the no man's land between science and pseudoscience, where so many fruitful thoughts lie buried, and at least as many illusions and wrong tracks as well. In Johann Grande's case, clues have been accumulating of late that revitalized water is more than just a creed. Indeed, there is also proof. It comes from a venerable institute in the Technical University of Graz in Austria. Here one has taken water from various sources, analyzed it according to scientific standards, and compared it to Grande's water. The results showed no differences, but for one single exception, and it is absolutely sensational. The revitalization process had apparently programmed the Grande water to reduce the surface tension by up to 17% compared to all the other waters tested, regardless of temperature. The head of the institute has no doubts about the physical and chemical explanations for this phenomenon. Since publishing the study, he has been swamped with inquiries and attacked by many colleagues to boot.
Ich möchte mich nur auf dieser Ebene bewegen, dass ich sagen kann, das, was für mich messbar ist.
I'd like to stick to my principle that I can believe something that is measurable. I would shun everything else emphatically. I am too much of a technologist to risk my neck.
Von der Wasserchemie einfach zu wenig verstehe.
Many of the revitalized water's effects remain a mystery, but one will be obliged to think again.
Ich muss das Kind anders nennen, weil ich plötzlich ein Wasser habe.
I'll have to rechristen the child because suddenly I've got one water that's called water and another that's also called water and only active in parentheses. We all know water as H2O and that's all. So it means we'll have to bring in a new concept.
Einen anderen Begriff wahrscheinlich sogar einführen.
Basically, the idea of water having a memory has been plaguing science for centuries. Above all, with the lessons of homeopathy, which is based on the assumption that water is capable of remembering certain active agents. Homeopathic medicines are so radically diluted that, taken statistically, no single dose can possibly contain a solitary active agent molecule. Nevertheless, the healing effect of the agent appears to be retained because the water remembers it. In Germany alone, some 4,000 doctors treat and heal with medicines that are produced on the strength of this memory effect, which, according to physics, shouldn't really exist. All current attempts to prove the phenomenon have ended in disaster.
Scientifically, it is hard to understand, if not impossible to understand, with what we know at the moment, how something that is so dilute could possibly have any effect. And I've yet to see any suggestion that is credible and that has stood up to testing that it can work. So, in that sense, I'm very, very skeptical.
Animals are regarded with less suspicion when it comes to pseudoscientific effects. Homeopathic medicines also work on animals, who care not a hoot about scientific disputes. Their owners, too, who pay for the treatment after all, are relatively uninfluenced. Had the treatment of their darling pets with homeopathy not worked, then that side of medicine would have gone broke long ago.
Geimpft ist er?
Geimpft ist er, ja. Die Impfungen machen wir regelmäßig.
The Austrian veterinary doctor Peter Knafel has specialized in homeopathy for more than 10 years, with continuing success. Many animals, already written off by their owners, recovered under his treatment. This is confirmed in countless studies, but which is redundant in practice.
Ob es wissenschaftlich ist oder nicht, spielt für mich persönlich.
I don't care whether it's scientifically proved or not. My only concern is whether it works. And day after day in my practice, I witness success. So proving homeopathy is not so important.
My advice is don't believe it. Because if you look at the way water behaves and everything we know about the molecular behavior of water, it's very, very hard to see how water could have a memory without dissolved substances. So my advice is don't believe it.
So how should the man in the street orientate himself in this no man's land between faith and science? Ignore everything that science considers poppycock? This would be very difficult for some. As here, for instance, in the tiny village of St. Marijn in the Alps, where the bells proclaim a physical mystery. Prior to its restoration, this 900-year-old church was plagued by rising damp, so damp that the sandstone walls gradually became mouldy. In fact, one could say that the walls positively soaked up the water. Today there is no longer any sign of this. Only a few years ago, Holy Mass was celebrated in 90% humidity. Now, it's as dry as a cardboard box factory. Responsible for the miracle is a nondescript appliance that works without electricity and which, according to its maker, calls on energy that finds no mention in books on physics. It's quite an absurd construction that nevertheless has undoubtedly reduced the dampness in the church by a third within the space of a few months. I'm no New Age enthusiast and no physics expert either, so I'm a layman in both subjects, I'm afraid. But at all events, it's already been proved that there is much that physics and orthodox medicine have not been able to prove, and that there are more things between heaven and earth than we can weigh and measure and so determine. So I'm convinced that no one has a monopoly in this matter, that there can be various ways to approach it.
Dass es verschiedene Zugänge und Wege geben kann.
Following the course of this startling invention quickly brings us to the venerable monastery at Klosterneuburg near Vienna. Here too, one had long done battle with dripping walls, most especially in one very old cellar that one wanted to convert to a vinothek. Today, the only damp thing in Klosterneuburg's vinothek is the wine. The walls are dry, and again, hanging well disguised from the ceiling, we find a mysterious device. It was much cheaper than all the other methods on offer, but was nonetheless viewed with mistrust for some time. We drilled the walls, we tested everything in the walls and so on, and it works. I'm quite convinced that it works. As a result of the success we've had here, which is palpable after all, it stood all the dampness tests, we have used the same method on 3 other projects, and it works there too. Apparently the device is able to manipulate the dampness so that it retreats into the earth. How does its inventor explain this phenomenon?
So, das ist dieser neuartige Generatortyp, der in diesem Weinfass...
So, that's the newfangled generator type that is built into a wine barrel and protected by it. Basically, the generator type is made up of a receiving antenna that receives the ground energy. The incoming energy is then polarized, that is, it's made dextrorotatory and put through the transmitting unit, on top of which the so-called cosmic energy flows in from above, and that strengthens the whole system.
Die sogenannte Raumenergie ein, die das ganze System in seiner Wirkung verstärkt.
Science or not, Wilhelm Mohorn has already sold 26,000 appliances and points to a band of exclusively happy customers. Is there still more out there than our book learning ever dreamed of? New miraculous effects make the participants euphoric and therefore blind when it comes to objections. In such cases, it is advisable to accept defeat honorably. A practical example from Moscow. Johannes Koppensteiner, who makes international contacts for Johann Grander and his revitalized water, also loves to launch daring experiments. In his Moscow hotel room, he places 2 little bottles with radioactive water beside 1 bottle of Grander revitalized water. Will the mere vicinity of the Grander water suffice to reduce the contamination overnight? Next day, his first call is at the university. Koppensteiner is full of optimism, and not without reason. A short while ago here in Moscow, scientists watched small amounts of radioactive polluted water being put through the mysterious Grander revitalizer, and it appeared that the rays had indeed been reduced. He's arrived, the Institute for Radiochemistry at the Moscow Lomonosov University. An undertaking like this is in no way an everyday occurrence for the scientist. Koppensteiner is a layman after all, and the experiment is anything but ordinary. Yuri Sapochnikov, head of the Venerable Institute, has left himself plenty of time and instructed several of his young students to apply themselves to the problem.
When I told him about the experiments that had been carried out in other institutes, he really said, no, this is not possible. But he told me, I've been doing, research work, with radiochemistry now for almost 40 years. I have never heard, that something could reduce radioactivity. So somehow, I think it was, the personal sympathy we felt for each other. He said, okay, give it a try.
The result of the test is just as most physicists would have expected. No reaction. Contrary to similar tests, the radioactive rays in the bottles have not diminished. Was the test too absurd? Did Koppensteiner expect a miracle?
Miracle, for me, is something, that happens beyond our understanding. That doesn't mean that it's in reality a miracle. Miracles always have, reasons. There's always a cause for the effect. Miracles are just an indication that we do not understand all. From a broader perspective, most likely, miracles are something, quite normal and just belonging to some other laws and conditions.
Some people will begin to think that our research borders on fraud, I'm afraid. But the time will soon come in which new parameters are introduced. Then everything will be in place, and scientists will be able to check our findings and also the relevant technology. Investigating the inner order of water, its memory, and the influence of the heavens, one inevitably comes across the quintessential myth, the snowflake. Do these artworks of nature store information in their bizarre forms? Do they bring messages from heaven to earth? Each year, sextillions of snowflakes fall from the clouds, and each crystal is unique. For centuries, researchers and philosophers alike have been fascinated. The first to photograph snowflakes was Wilson Bentley, a farmer from Vermont. Bentley became an obsessed photographer at the end of the 19th century because, as a child, he had heard a sentence that he couldn't forget. No one snowflake is like another. The Center for Snowflake Research is today in California, of all places, at the California Institute of Technology, where there's a physicist who searches for the order that governs the wondrous forms of snowflakes. Ken Librecht is currently the sole physicist able to produce snow crystals in a laboratory. All thought of cosmic energy is scoffed at in these rooms. Ken works quite arbitrarily and always somewhat casually.
Oh gosh, it just sort of came up one day. We were talking about science and things in general, having a beer, and there was some students, and it came up, and I was basically just interested enough to start researching it, just to learn about it, and then I got very interested in it. I found the physics was interesting, and a lot of it was unknown, and it looked like one could learn a thing or two by doing some experiments.
The snow crystals are bred in an icebox. It soon became clear that they react to the tiniest differences in temperature and to particles of dust in the air too, and that they alter their shape accordingly. Librecht won't own to having noticed any memory or cosmic influences. Thus, the old question as to whether two flakes look alike answers itself in a profane way.
Well, similar shape you can find, it's sort of true that no two snow crystals that are alike, at least the complex ones that fall out of the sky, they're a little like people. They have a lot of little nooks and crannies, and the shape they're in depends on the path they've chosen to fall through the sky. And no two crystals take exactly the same path, and so no two crystals are exactly alike. They're like people.
So it's that simple. But what is the solution to the great puzzle? Will the whole excitement about the memory of water turn out to be a delusion in the end? Or will the laws of physics have to be rewritten? Both supporters and adversaries alike of these daring theses profess to possess clear-cut evidence and claim to have true science on their side. One might accuse these courageous discoverers and inventors throughout the world of boundless naivety, they who are not afraid to question nature's laws. But in its infinite and glorious variety, water itself points physicists and heretics alike down a common road, a road with a signpost: never give up. I'm quite sure that we're on the right track. When I started to work with Yuri, I sensed that it was right. I'd like to add that lots of people come to us who've worked out new technologies, who busy themselves with the physical effects of water. They come to us because they're turned away by traditional science, which is often afraid of them. However, fear is something that hampers the development of science. We investigate these claims and phenomena according to strict scientific laws. If we find conformities which can be proved beyond doubt, we don't hesitate to talk about them and inform the general public.
sometimes persistence does pay off. If you have a scientific instinct that tells you that people are ignoring something, I think it would be quite wrong for me to say they shouldn't pursue it. Because going against the common belief is a very exciting thing to do in science and can lead to dramatic new discoveries.
Bei der Wissenschaft heißt H2O und Schluss aus.
The scientists call it H2O, and that's it. That's the end of it. But there's a lot more to it than that. And I'm of the opinion that they should look into water more.
Da mehr ums Wasser kümmern sollten.